today's lesson, if you want to follow what I'm going through, then this is the slide that you're going to use. Now, as you know, I also have a video here about the slide, right? So you know that this is the slide that you need to study for the test. All the information that is on this slide is the only thing you need to know for the test. You only need to know the information on these slides. Alright? And if you don't remember what I'm saying about all the slides, remember that here in this link underneath it, I have filmed myself talking about all the slides. Yeah. Right? Remember that? So you also have an audio here. And remember also that you have recorded my lessons so you can listen again, right? Now the best way to study for the test is to ask questions about everything that I'm going through. Ask questions. Like if you and I study, I ask questions. Like for example, what does AD mean? What does AN mean? And for example, like that. And then you answer. And then you ask me 2 questions. And then I ask you another. And then you ask me. You know, you can do it like that, right? Or you can sit in groups. Like, okay, so if you ask 5 questions and I answer, then you ask 5 questions and then, you know, like this, right? Or you can do Quizlet. In Quizlet, you can ask questions yourself. Or you can teach someone else. Because by teaching someone else, you need to know the information yourself. Like let's say that I am sitting with you and you say that, oh, I don't remember anything from the first part, right? Then I will teach you about the first part. In that way, I need to remember and I also teach you about it. So this is how I recommend that you study for the test. What you need to know from all these slides. You need to know the history I've been talking about. You need to know about the authors, the books they've written, and a little short what the books are about. Yes?
Well, what do you mean with groups?
That we sit like in groups of 3 or 4, and then each one of you is asking 1 question each, or 5 questions each.
Okay, like for this lesson?
Yeah, for the information to study for the test, not just for this lesson. I mean, like, let's all make a group and we're going to study for the test together. Like, instead of you sitting in your own room alone, why don't you go on FaceTime or Hangout or whatever you hang out, you know, or Discord or whatever, and just sit and study together like that. Because in that way, you get, oh yeah, and you remember, oh, did you remember she said that? Yeah, and then you help each other to remember. It's better. Okay? So, now we are going to open this link here that we have been using before. And I'm going to jump a bit forward because we already spoke about the first part. Remember this? Yeah? We spoke about why it's called BC and AD. And we also spoke about the first civilization found in England is based here on Stonehenge. Remember? Yeah. And it's from 3000 and so forth. Remember that I also said that everybody was coming from Africa here because it was too cold up here, right? That's why the civilization started around the equator. And then I spoke about the Celts, remember? And the Celts being pushed back by the Anglo-Saxons and moving to Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. And the language they spoke was Gaelic. He also influenced the language by the Jutes and all the Vikings. Remember I said all that? I also said that Latin influenced the English language in 2 ways. One way with the Roman Empire, second way was with the Crusaders, with Christianity, right? And I remember I told you about how the Roman Empire chose Christianity to be the religion so that they could control them better. But then it got out of hand, and later on when they killed the spokesperson, then he became a martyr, people spread his ideas, and that later became the religion of Christianity. With that, Latin, right, was spread in Western Europe. Why Western Europe? Because there were only farmers in Western Europe, right? Weren't civilized enough. And then I spoke about the Crusaders, how they looked like. Remember? Beard and no teeth and ugly and dirty. But so that their rumors would be better, then they invented the ballads. And the ballads is a hero song about these Crusaders. We also spoke about Beowulf. Beowulf being the story with an unknown author about a knight killing 2 dragons and spreading Christianity. We listened to Old English and what Old English sounded like. And Old English sounded like Old German, But then it resembles to today's Icelandic language, but it sounds like German, right? And then we came to the medieval point. A medieval period being 12 to 15. And the focus point was religion. Right? Remember that? And because religion took over Western Europe, the churches were built on top of the hills to be closer to God. Right? And because it took all their money from the villages to build the churches, right? People became poor, and with poverty came famine, which is starvation. And with that also came the diseases like the plague. 1/3 died, remember? And then, of course, we had the French fighting with the English called the Norman Conquest. William, the French king, took over, became king of England, and changed the spelling of the language, spelling. And then after that, after William, we had kings fighting who would take over after William. And that was the War of the Roses, because each of the kings had a different color rose. And southern England's king won, and that's why the symbol of England is a red rose, because he won. And then came the printing press. Johan Gutenberg was the guy that stole the printing press idea. But with the printing press, it consequently led to more production of books. And with more production of books, more people could read and write. So then, all these kings and queens started to send out people to discover the world. We had travelers to discover the world. We had Marco Polo discovering India in the east, and we had Leif Erikson, the Viking, discovering America, Amerigo Vespuccini, and then Christopher Columbus taking the cred for discovering America, which he never really did. He discovered the West Indies by mistake. Remember? Why wouldn't he take the credit? Because he had bigger sponsors from the Spanish Queen. Then we also spoke about the authors here. We spoke about the Greek author Homeros. We spoke about Iliad and Odyssey. Iliad being about Agamemnon and Paris fighting over his wife Helena, right? And then they're fighting outside Troy. And how they are creating this massive horse and filling it with soldiers to deceive Paris, and at night the soldiers jumped out and took over the castle. We spoke about Odysseus and his return home from his big fight in Troy, and that he got a beef with Poseidon. Then we spoke about Dante, how he were sent down to hell and back to get Beatrice, his lover. We spoke about Chaucer, who invented the frame story. Frame story. Meaning there's one main story and inside it there are several short stories. It's all about these people writing to Canterbury, each of them telling a story. And then Marco Polo talking about his travels, he was traveling. And then of course we have Henry VIII who killed all the wives. And what's the big deal with him? Well, he changed religion to Church of England, right? Remember that? And his daughter Elizabeth I. What's the big deal with her? She sent out ships to take over the world, and that was the beginning of the Commonwealth, the big England of ruling the world, and that spread the language. Then we came to the Renaissance period, and now people got fed up with religion, so they all bet on the kings and queens. That was during the 1600s. And theaters was a thing, right? We had the Globe and the Rose, created by the Shakespeare, and then also artists were all big, lifted up. We have Michelangelo, and then we have Leonardo da Vinci. We spoke about Shakespeare, how he moved to London, started to write plays and different sonnets, which is a poem, like Romeo and Juliet. Then Machiavelli, we spoke about Machiavelli, right? And how he wrote The Prince, and he was in prison. Then we spoke about Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote, who was this delusional, like farmer guy who thought he was a knight and fighting windmills. Boccaccio, the priest or the monk, who said how best he could sleep with nuns. Remember that? And then Milton, who was questioning the Bible and saying that Adam had a first wife and so forth. So we spoke about all these things. We stopped here, right? So we will continue here. And just a quick, we started off, but then we really didn't got continued. Now the Enlightenment period is the 1700s. It's called Enlightenment period because people were fed up with believing in the religion, believing in kings and queens. So the focus point of the Enlightenment period is science. It needed to be proven to be true. Science was the thing. They said like this: if there is a God, and they say God is within you, then why don't we cut you open and see where God is? So they did that to people. They also said that, you know what? Babies, they don't really say that they are hurt when they operate on them. So I'm sure they don't have any emotions and feelings. So why don't we operate on babies without any tranquilizers? Let's see if we can dig up dead bodies and just put it together and see if we can get them to live again. So we did these stupid, weird experiments. But that led to people understanding more and more how the body worked. So experiments were the thing. And then they said, right, we don't want this king anymore to tell us what to do. We want to be free. And that led to different revolutions. So the 1700s was an era of revolution. We had the French Revolution, 1789. 1789 was the French Revolution start, where they stormed the Bastille and they said, okay, take out all the kings, the queen, take her to the Place de Concorde and chop her head off. Remember I told you that? And they were chopping the heads off, and then he hurt his shoulder, right? So he got Mr. Guillotine to go in there and then chop the head off with this machine, right? So they did that. Everybody was applauding. They were on the square like, oh, bravo, like that, right? They thought the new world was going to come. Then we had 1772 to 76, right? We had the Declaration of Independence that was signed by Washington and some others, saying they were going to be free from England because they don't want to pay taxes anymore. We spoke about the flag, I remember. The 50 stars representing the 50 states today, and the 13 stripes representing the first 13 states in the east coast of America where the white have moved. Remember? We had the Union Jack being Great Britain's flag, which is a mix of Scottish, Old Irish flag, and the English flag together. That's why it looks like that.
Can you please say about the stars and the stripes again?
So the 50 states that are in America today are represented by the 50 stars, whilst the 13 stripes represent the first 13 states that were in America by the white. And this is called Stars and Banners, the flag, American flag, Stars and Banners. All right, but Elizabeth I, she did a good job though, because she sent out all these people to take over the world, and she took over different areas, and the English language spread. So through colonization is 1 out of 4 reasons how the English language spread around the world. Wait. So, of course, as I said to you before, because she was in control over so many countries and everything, right? She also had some problems with criminal people. So she said to James Cook, Cook, go and find me a place to dump all the criminal people. And he said, all right. So he sailed. He missed Australia. I don't know how you can miss that, but he did. And on his way back, he saw Australia. And he said, great, this is a great country. Why don't we just dump all criminal people here? And so he did. And that's why there are white people in Australia, and that's why they speak English there. Question?
If you could repeat what happened 1772 to 1776, it was something Declaration of Independence.
Correct. That was the date. Actually, 76 was the date, but it started 72.
Okay.
But that 4th of July was the date when America became a country of its own, called, and that signed, the paper they signed was called the Declaration of Independence.
Thank you.
Good. And then, except for taking over the world, we also spoke about the Atlantic Triangle. And what did they do? They sent off ships from England to the west of Africa, right? They took the people and they forced them to Caribbean islands like Tahiti and Cuba, sold them to the white people to go and get them as slaves to work on their farms. And then gave them money or other things, went back to England, got more ships to Africa again, to Caribbean and so forth. This is called the Atlantic Triangle. The Atlantic Triangle is the biggest slave trade ever. And they were calling the ships like Bounty, which means paradise and things like that.
You said the English language spread through 4 ways.
Yes.
What are those 4? One was colonization. What are the other 3?
I will get there. You know, it's a tension thing. All right. And then schools. White rich boys started to attend schools. Not only monks and things, but also young children started schools at this time. Before, people couldn't read and write so much. Now we have the authors. Now this girl here, I mean, she wrote about how women were married off for money. And she's between 17 and 1800, but we keep her. Called Pride and Prejudice, about love and about women marrying for money. Then we spoke about Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe, being a guy. And why is this a typical Enlightenment book? Why is Robinson Crusoe a typical Enlightenment book? Because Robinson is not waiting for God to save him, not waiting for king to save him, but he's relying on science and different things to build his own stuff so he can save his own ass, right? And also, he's not just alone, he needs to take a slave, but he doesn't care about the slave. He just calls the slave Friday because he happened to find him on a Friday, right? And he teaches him religion. So slave, religion, science is all the combination that you can find in Robinson Crusoe. That's what makes it a typical Enlightenment book. Swift. Remember I told you about Swift? He turned up on this little island with the Lilliputians, right? And he was tied down, all right? And they took him to the village, and then he saw that they were fighting about what side of the egg to eat. Remember that? And then he blew the ships away, and there was a fire, and then he peed on the fire, and he was a hero, right? So he was like a joke of you know, society, how the rich people are peeing on the small people and so forth. Then Goethe, we spoke about Goethe a bit fastly because we were ending, so I was like rushing, so that's why I want to repeat it. This guy Goethe, he wrote about young Werther's suffering. Now young Werther was so much in love with this woman, but he couldn't get her. So much that he killed himself. And white women read this book and they were like weeping, and then they killed themselves. And then the king said to Goethe, you know what, Goethe, you need to change the ending of the book because white women are dying like flies here. Right? So he went back and he changed the ending of his book. Then we had Rousseau and Voltaire. Yeah, Rousseau and Voltaire. And they were all revolutionary authors, saying that you should be free, saying that in Emile, saying that children should be children, saying in Candide that everyone is equal. That's what their books are about. And then Robert Burns here, who wrote Auld Lang Syne. What's the big deal with him? It's a poem that became a song, and old English-speaking countries sing this in New Year's. Da, 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 da. That one is Auld Lang Syne. So thanks to that guy, everybody knows this poem, Auld Lang Syne. Yes? The what book? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, Goethe. He's German. He's a what?
Did women read? You said that.
Yeah, well, they read it in secret, though. Only white rich women read, you know. Because the boys went to school, but then they came home and they taught their sisters in secret. So they sat home and they read in secret. So it wasn't like a public thing. But then all of a sudden, when they started to die like this, that's when it became known to public that women could read and write. But it wasn't like you went to school or anything like that, you know? Because they were only supposed to just be, you know, they thought women had smaller brains than men, right? They said, yeah, but that's what they said. They said that women's job is to be in the kitchen, you know, cook and clean and take care of children. That's their job. And if any woman was saying something like that, right? In the medieval time, if you were a woman that knew how to deliver a baby or to cure a disease or something, then you were a witch. They burned you, right? That's how it was for a very long time.
They actually say that women had smaller brains.
Yeah.
Because smaller brains means that you're smarter because
That you are stupid.
No.
Well, they thought because you're stupid, because you know your head is like hollow and there's like a little ding 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 ding, like a pinball in there. Then we came to the next period. Were you gonna say something?
No.
All right, next period. Now we have moved away from being all square and everything in the 1700s was science and so on. But then they said, what about emotions then? I mean, we're just talking about science and facts and all this stuff. We need emotions. So that's when the Romantic period came. And the focus point of the Romantic period, emotions. They said, because we are now focusing on emotions, women, the only thing they can do is talk about emotions. Yeah. Women have no brain for science. They are too stupid for that, but they are very good at emotions. So, because of that, we allow women to read and write now. So in the 1800s, that's when women were allowed to attend school for the first time and start to read and write, because it was all about emotions. Now, let's see, look at this guy here. Now, he looks a bit angry, right? He is the father, the founder of one of the biggest theories in psychology. His name is Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud. Now, this guy here, he said, emotions are not to be taken lightly because it's all about your psyche, your mind, your soul. And if you are not okay in your soul and your mind, you will be sick. And people are like, yeah, right? But today we know it's true. So psychology, he was very good at that. Okay, so women started to teach each other how to read and write and have different groups where they met and started publishing books. But then something else happened. Because of the science period in the 1700s, more and more inventions were discovered or they were created. So so much so that they discovered or invented the steam machine. You know the steam machine, how it works? Oh, one person knows. Right.
I know.
So you have water. There's a lid on there. You put fire underneath. It boils. The water boils. Steam is created when you boil water. If there is nowhere for the steam to exit, it will blow up. But they make a little hole so that the steam can exit that little hole. Now that hole is pressing so much steam out that you can actually, if you have a cogwheel, I'm not very good at cogwheels, but here you go, there's a cogwheel. If you press the steam towards the cogwheel, it starts spinning around. If you have another cogwheel connected to that one, that spins around, and voila, you have the steam machine. So what happened, you know those old trains where you see the white smoke coming out? Have you seen that on films?
Yes.
That's a steam engine. So here, people are putting coal on the fire, and then you have big water tanks, so you fill out with water, and that's what makes the train. So voila, we had steam machines, and that created factories. People they didn't need a horse to carry like little things. Now they had a whole train to carry things. So the industry started, and that's why it's called the Industrial Revolution. Factories needed to be created to build machines and other things. People were needed to be working in these factories. Children were needed to dig out coal from the ground for these machines. So more and more people needed to move to the same place. What happened? Urbanization happened. That meant that people that used to be farmers moved into town to work in these factories. But that happened so fast that they didn't have time to build new homes. So everyone was just crammed up in one home like this. And if there are too many people that are uneducated, crammed up in this with poor quality, little money, then of course diseases and other things started here. Poverty. So during the 1800s, people were super poor. They had children like there's no tomorrow, and they couldn't afford to take care of the kids. So what did they do with them? They threw them out on the streets. So our orphans, children without parents, were just running around the street like there's nothing. That's how it was. And then they were dreaming about nature. That's why you see paintings about nature, because they were wishing like, oh, remember when we used to be farmers? We were in nature, it was so nice. And that's why people started to paint about nature. Music was more connected to nature. If you look at these different composers, it's like you're dreaming away. Everything was all about all these emotions, poetry and all. Everything you see was all connected to, because they wanted to escape from all this horrible life they had here. And then also churches that started were building in 1700 now started to finish. And they were all pompous and great and all to show how rich the country was. We have a subgroup called the Goth subgroup. Yeah, Gothic. So that is a subgroup, an undergroup to the Romantic period. What's the big deal with Goth except for the fact that they always dress in black? It is that they were interested in mysteries and folklore. And that later created vampires, werewolves, the black cat, the moon. Everything you can think about Halloween stuff is goth, ghosts, things like that. And that started here. People read about it, they started to read about it, and write about it, and it was like, ooh, interesting. So the goth period is subgroup 1800. Now here we are. Mary Shelley. We are now presenting the authors from the left, going around their circle to the right. Mary Shelley. Now Mary Shelley here, now she moved away with her husband to Italy. You know, her father didn't really like it. He would prefer her to marry another guy, but she was like, you know, I like Percy. Her name, his husband was Percy. He was already an author. And I'm going to marry Percy and I'm going to move to Italy. So like, okay. So she moved to Italy with her husband, Percy Shelley, who was already an author, and with Byron, this guy here. They were their friends. And they said, they were sitting there in Italy saying, okay, you know what? Let's make a competition between Mary, Percy, and Lord Byron and see who can write the best horror story ever. We're not going to write our names on the story. We're just going to write the story, send it out to people, let them read all three, and vote and see who's going to win the competition. And she won the competition with the book Frankenstein. Who is Frankenstein?
A dead man that just...
No!
Is he like the doctor?
The doctor. Most people, including Disney, says that the monster is Frankenstein. It's wrong. Monster is called monster. The guy who creates the monster, the doctor, he is Frankenstein, not the monster. Right? Yep.
And can you please repeat between who was the competition between?
Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, and Lord Byron.
Lord. Oh, okay.
Now, we have Frankenstein. We have Dr. Frankenstein. He goes to the cemetery, right? And then he collects a head from one dead body. He collects a torso. He collects body parts from the other one. He lies it on the bed. And then he says, okay, I've sewn together these body parts from different humans. And then I'm going to raise a kite. You know what a kite is? Have you seen a kite?
Yes.
That flies in the wind. And there's a big storm. And then this kite is risen up in the air when the storm is hitting. And the lightning hits the kite. The lightning then travels down into the body of the monster. The monster wakes up like that. Exactly. And then Dr. Frankenstein is happy. It's alive, he's shouting. Right? But then what happens is that the monster is going crazy and just ruining and setting things on fire and just making a mess. So why did she write this? She was writing it as a critique, saying, okay, we have these machines now doing man's labor. What will happen if we let the machines in the future take over humans? You know what will happen? We will create monsters. And she didn't know how right she was. She wrote this in the 1800s, and look today what's happening with AI and everything. Interesting. Edgar Allan Poe, one of my favorites. Now, this guy here, he's a weirdo. He is so weird. I mean, he was an orphan when he was in newborn. A woman in the shop took him in, raised him till he was 3, then she died, he was kicked out on the streets again. Another person raised him till he was 7. Then when he was 7, 8 years old, he started drinking and taking drugs. So he's basically a drug alcoholic mess, right? But his stories are fantastic. He learned how to read and write by listening to other rich kids. Then he started to write books. Black Cat is about, there was a guy, and this guy, he was an alcoholic. He had a lot of animals and he had a wife, no children. And when he was drinking, he started to be annoyed with all these pets. So he kicked all the pets out and got rid of them, except for his best favorite pet, which was a black cat. But when he was drinking, right, then the cat was always coming and stroking his body to his legs, and he was like, get rid of me. But then one day when he was super drunk, he got annoyed with this cat, so he took a pen and stabbed it in the eye. And the cat was like, and it ran away. And then he said, oh my God, what did I do to my cat? And then he went to the pub and he was drinking, being sad for the cat. And then when he turned, the cat was there with one eye, no pen in it, just looking at him. And he's like, oh, you're alive. Oh, he's happy. Then he took him home. But he felt really bad because he saw that the cat had a wound and only one eye. And he felt bad about himself. He's like, I'm such a horrible person. Look what I did to you. Like, oh, I better drink some more. He drank some more, and then the cat was being still nice. And he's like, why are you still nice to me? You know, look at what I did to your eye. Get rid of me. And the cat was coming up, and he's like, okay, I'm going to take. So he took the cat, he took a rope, he put it around his neck, and hang up the cat dead. And then the next day he said, the cat, oh my God, I killed my cat. But then when he looked at the tree, the cat was gone. And he was like, where does the cat go? So he went to the pub drinking, thinking, what did I do? The cat was there with a rope around his neck and one eye. And he was like, you don't die, what is this? So he's like, get rid of me, he scared the cat away. And he ran home and he's like, oh my God, this cat is weird, he's like not dying and I'm a horrible person. And then he ran home and he was all confused and his wife was saying like, what's wrong with you? He's leave me alone, what's wrong? Leave me alone, I said. He pushed her, she fell over. And then he went crazy and took a shovel, you know, that you dig with, and then smashed her head in. And smashed her till her brain exploded. Then when he woke up, he was like, oh my God, I killed my wife. What should I do with her? So he grabbed hold of the wife and took her down to the basement. And then took the body and placed it against the wall like this. And took some bricks and then bricked her into the wall. And then he was like, where's the cat? I don't know. And then the wife started, okay, new life, right? But then 1 week is gone, and then all of a sudden, there was a knock on the door. And he opened the door, and there's a police officer saying, excuse me, sir, have you seen your wife? She hasn't been to work lately. And he's like, yeah, but you know, my wife, she took off with this other man and so forth, right? And he's like, yeah, is it all right if I check the house? But yeah, come in. So the police officer went around like, what's that? It's the basement. Can I go down? Yeah, sure. Okay. Went down. And as the policeman was going to leave, he heard, meow. What was that? It's nothing. I heard something. No, nothing. Okay, let me see. Yeah. Meow. There's something in here. Open, the rotten body fell out, and the ghost cat sitting on his head going, and that was the end of story. And that was the Black Cat, right? Edgar Allan Poe. And it's all goth. So all these stories are goth stories because they involve ghosts. Victor Hugo wrote about Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now Notre Dame was the church I showed before. This guy is sitting on the clock tower looking down at Esmeralda. So beautiful. And he's ugly. Right? The hunchback, he has a hunch, he's ugly, he's looking and says, I wish I had you, but here I am stuck in the clock tower. And he saves her, but even though he's being all kind, she still marries the handsome idiot prince. So what is he saying? He's saying that even if you have a good heart, looks really just matters. You have to be handsome. So it's kind of opposite to what we say today, but there you go. Alexander Dumas. It's not Dumas, it's Dumas. French guy. Now, he wrote about the Three Musketeers. The Three Musketeers, they are bodyguards to the rich people. Prince, the king, and some lords. And they are fighting. They are bodyguards of that time with swords and stuff, not guns. And they say, should we really, pay our lives to save these rich people, or should we just, be free? That's what he's discussing. Scott here, he wrote about Ivanhoe. Ivanhoe is a knight who is fighting for his honor and his king and his kingdom until he got injured, and he falls in love with a girl who helps him, who is poor and lower class. And then he's in conflict. Should I go back to become the knight for my honor, or should I marry a simple girl? In conflict, what's right and wrong? This one here, her name is Elizabeth, what's her face? Bronte. She's one of 3 sisters, as you know, and she wrote Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is about Elizabeth, the girl who is falling in love with her stepbrother, and she is, and she dies, and she goes back and haunts him as a ghost. Go on.
Her sister, Elizabeth Bronte, or however I can pronounce it, isn't that the girl Charlotte Bronte's sister, which we had on the author's test?
Correct. And then we have Emily Dickinson. Now this woman here, she was a weirdo. Now she wrote a lot of poems. Fantastic, beautiful love poems. A Rose is one poem. But she was a bit... The thing is with her that she didn't really like people. She wanted always to be alone. She was always dressing in white, and she only had 2 big dogs as her company. And then when she died and they went into her house, they found a dead corpse in her bed. It turned out that there was a salesman years and years back that knocked on her door selling something. She invited him, killed him, and put him on the bed, and then she dedicated her poems to this corpse. There you go. And then Lord Byron. Lord Byron wrote Don Juan. What's the big deal with Don Juan? It's about this guy who lives in Venice, and he's an expert in how to get girls. So Don Juan book was actually a handbook how to get girls. And how does he get girls? Well, he has dinner, candlelight dinner, rose in the mouth, singing under the balcony, giving chocolate and roses. So everything that you know about Valentine's and romance today is from the book Don Juan. And that's why you say to a player guy, a guy who's a player, that he's a Don Juan today, because he was a player in this book. He was like jumping from girl to girl, like a bee to different flowers, until he fell in love and then was killed. Yes?
What is corpse?
Corpse is a person that is dead and is no longer existing other than the body. Dead body. All right, and then we continue. We have this one, Twain. Now, Twain, he changed his name. His name was Clemens something. But he changed it to Mark Twain. Now, he wrote about Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn is about a young boy who had an alcoholic father, and he escaped from his father because he was beating the crap out of him. And then he met this escaped slave called Jim. And together with the slave, they were riding on a little raft in the Mississippi River in different adventures. Barry guy. He didn't want to grow old. Why? His brother died, and his mother loved his dead brother more than he loved him. And the only thing he wanted in life is to go back and be a child where his brother was alive, and not to grow up and be a responsible adult. He wanted to go back where he had his mother's love together with the brother, and his brother, and he was a kid. So he didn't want to grow old. He didn't like being amongst adults. He preferred the company of children, and he wished the love of his mother, which he never got. What happened? He wrote Peter Pan. And what is Peter Pan about? It's about a boy who doesn't want to grow old and has Wendy being his mother. So basically the whole book is about his life. Dickens here, Charles Dickens. He started off as, polishing shoes, working in a shoe factory. Then he started to write in magazines. Now the magazine said, you will get a job as an author if you can make sure to sell the magazines better than everyone else. So he invented a word. The word is called cliffhanger. And what's a cliffhanger? It means that when you're watching an episode, and it's just when it's the most exciting, right? You want to go over to the next episode to see how it continues. How did he do that? Why is it called cliffhanger? Because his character in the magazine was always at the end hanging from a freaking cliff. So people were like, oh, I have to buy the next episode, X magazine to see what happens. And guess what? He made it until he ended up on the cliff again. And then he made it until he ended up on the cliff again. So it's called the cliffhanger because he created that word. And then he also started writing books. One of his famous books is called Oliver Twist. What's the big deal with him? All his books contain of children being the heroes, adults being the bad guys. They did. That's why he became an author. But he did, though. He said they only worked for a little bit, right? But, the magazines sell more than ever, so he got whatever it was requested of him, and then later he went home and became an author. He had 10 kids. He took all the profit and money he earned from being all successful and moved to America, left his family and his 10 kids in poverty. Now, Louisa May Alcott. This woman was the woman that wrote a book. So she was a female, obviously, and she wrote a book to women, about women. So the first girl book, you can say, called Little Women, which is about her and her sisters. Now, Oscar Wilde, one of the smartest men ever lived. Super smart, very intelligent, wrote plays, poems, everything. Was amazing, fantastic, successful. What happened? The mayor found out that his son, Bosie, and Oscar was having an affair. And homosexuality was forbidden back then. Bosie was fine because he was the mayor's son, so they let him be. But they took Oscar and put him in jail for 30 years for homosexuality, which totally ruined him and his reputation. But even so, he's still a fantastic author, worth reading. Picture Dorian Gray is one of his work, which is about a boy or man who sells his soul to the devil, saying that the painting of him will carry the age and become old, but not him, until the love of his life sees the painting and the spell breaks. Now the Russians. What's the big deal with the Russians in literature? Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment. What? Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, the thing is with Crime and Punishment is that the Russians were the experts of the mind's psyche, of to write how the characters are feeling in their heads. Realism. Realism is when you write it for real, how it really is. Crime and Punishment, about a student who sells a clock to a contract, a woman that is giving you money for a thing you're selling. He sees that she has more money in the bedroom, when she was digging up, and takes an axe, chaps it in her head, kills her, takes the money, and feels bad about it afterwards. Another guy that prefer the children's company over adults is Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll is autistic. He really doesn't like adults, always wanted to be around children and read children's books. But he wrote about Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland, about a girl who follows a white rabbit, falls down the rabbit hole, and enters a new magic world. So, all these authors and these books. And guess what? We're at the end. Because we're not going to go too much into modernism, that will be for later, but there are some things worth mentioning. So, one of the 4 ways of spreading English around the world is colonization. But there are 3 other ways. The second is inventions. Through inventions like the radio and the gramophone and the film, later on moving picture, created so that people could see how it sounded, how the English language sounded like, and see how people were speaking and how they acted, not just read it from the book. So how English is spread the second way around the world is through the inventions. The third way, later on, through modernism, which is 1900 to 40 is through, the beginning of technology. That later in the 90s, 1990, created the internet. So the third way of how language was spread fast around the world is through the internet. But before that, the fourth way is through music. Because in 1920s America, we had white people separated from the black and from other nationalities. So we had white people, the only place where they were listening or hearing music was in church. And they were only singing white church music. Now the black people, they brought the music from their roots, mixed with the white people, and created a fantastic music genre of blues and jazz. But they were not allowed to be sung amongst the white. So they were in clubs called the speakeasies. And they were underground secret clubs where they could sing their music. And some white young people went to these clubs to listen to this fantastic music and then interacted. And then later they came out and they said, you know what, I'm not going to have a long dress anymore. I'm going to cut it short. Okay? And they said, what are you doing? Yeah, I'm going to show this part of my leg. And I'm going to play music. And say, you're not allowed to play that black music. Yeah, I am. Because it's great. And I'm going to move my legs. Yeah, really? It's going to go crazy. You're just the devils. No, I'm going to dance. And it's called Charleston, where I'm moving my legs like this. And people went like, ah, crazy. And then I'm going to cut my hair off because all women had long hair. I'm going to have it short. And that started the roaring 20s, which means the crazy 20s, where the young people started to mix, listening to all this music. And with that music, through the gramophones, it spread around the world. And that's the fourth way of how the English language spread. Questions?
What was the fourth way?
Inventions. Like film, like the gramophone. Yeah.
You said that white people got to listen to music at church.
Yeah.
But how did black people got to listen? You said
they say they also had, because they met in secret, right? And they had gospel, right? They also had church music, which is a gospel, but that involved into the blues of their history and everything. It was different type of music, right? I recommend you all to listen to music from the 30s, 40s, and so, just so you understand how that type of music is beautiful. But that type of music really is the base of all music that is today. It's connected. Everything is connected. Okay? So that's it. That's all you need to know for the test. All right? Now remember, kids, to ask questions. Come to my homework hour if there's anything you missed. Create Quizlets, share with each other, create groups. And then next week's first lesson, we're going to just spend it all on practicing for the test and doing all this stuff. So there's no other homework than practicing for the test. Yes, yeah, everything. Todo. See? You can do it. No, but you need to know that it's a doctor and it's a monster involved in it. Yeah, like briefly. Like one sentence. Yeah. Yes. Oh, well then even better. If you don't have a lesson with me, then you can definitely make sure to create study groups then, all right? All right, rise and shine.